Hey, thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Nandini Makrendi. I'm the head curator here at the Hunter, and I had the pleasure of working with all the artists that you see up here for this exhibition, and they really all went above and beyond to put this show together. I want to thank Pinnacle Financial Partners. They sponsored this exhibition and made it possible. And Martha Mackey, who sponsors our ArtWise talks during the course of the year, which is very generous of her. So here we have Craig Drennen, and I'm going to go with notes here. Craig is a professor at Georgia State University, where he has taught since 2009. He's also served as Dean of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Drawing for 4 years. He's gotten the Guggenheim Fellowship, which is pretty grand, I'd say, and has exhibited across the country and even at some international venues. His work has been in Art Forum, Art in America, the New York Times, and other publications. And he is currently, or for the last decade, I'd say, exploring contemporary life through William Shakespeare's play, Timon of Athens. So he's going to give you a literature lesson while he's giving you an art lesson, I think. So. Next we have Anna Carll. Anna has a Bachelor of Arts from University of Florida in Gainesville. She's a Floridian. She relocated to Atlanta and worked there as a graphic designer for 16 years before moving up to Chattanooga eventually. She started painting and creating in different ways, including bookmaking, collage, and you can see one of her paintings, it's really beautiful, on the Macaulay walls as you drive by. It's been there for a few years. She has exhibited widely, and we've been very lucky enough to also have some of her artist books and process sketchbooks on view here. So I hope if you haven't taken a closer look at that you will before you leave tonight. And third, but not least, is Jerushia Graham. Jerushia is also Atlanta-based. She earned her Bachelor of Fine Arts in Fabric Design and Printmaking from the University of Georgia. Her Master of Fine Arts is in Book Arts and Printmaking from the University of Arts in Philadelphia. She works at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking, which is the perfect fit for someone interested in book arts, printmaking, paper cutting, as the works are on display. And she also has exhibited nationally and internationally. So we're so glad that all of you are here. Welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to Craig.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. Thanks to Nandini and the staff here. They've been great to work with. So I've been a fan of the Hunter Museum for a long, long time, and I've been coming up and seeing shows, so it's a great honor to actually have some stuff on the wall. So I greatly appreciate this opportunity of being able to be here, and with these other artists as well. Again, my name is Craig Drennen, and I have a painting practice that to me makes perfect sense, but to other people, they always have a question or two. And also, by the way, these are the paintings, but down on the end, there's a photograph of that time I fought a cobra. So make sure you look at that before you leave, too. Have you seen any cobras in Chattanooga today? You're welcome. But what I do is, back in 2008, I discovered what I call a found subject, like a discarded subject, which was Shakespeare's worst play called Timon of Athens. It's the only one of his plays not produced in his lifetime, and it's not very good. So it's probably an abandoned rough draft. Nobody's going to claim that it's great, but there's something about that, about the really high prestige Shakespeare and the low prestige Timon of Athens. Having those two things braided together was a really interesting starting point to me. So I like that. I like that kind of uneven, in doubt, questionable starting point, which is how I usually feel, most days. So what I do is I make a different type of painting, a different body of work, but it does, it comes from painting, a different type of work for every character in the play. And that's all I've done since 2008. So I'm getting towards the end. I think there are about 6 characters left. But I say that, and people's first question is, oh, I should read the play. No, don't do that. The fact that you recognize Shakespeare's name is enough. So you already instantly had some lofty kind of feeling. And then Timon of Athens, there was you didn't know what that was. You just had question marks and a sort of an empty spot That's fine. Reading it will not be useful. And my work's not didactic at all. And in fact, usually people know less when they walk away. So it's anti-didactic. But the T's, as you might guess, are for Timon, the lead character. And when I first started making these T shapes and I'd send them off to a fabricator and they'd come back. And then I started picking them up and carrying them around. And people would, if I'm outside, people would slow down their cars and look at me carrying this enormous T. And I thought, why are they doing this? And then somebody said, well, it's almost a crucifix. And I said, oh, you're right. It's 75% of a crucifix. So when I started to think how I'm going to paint them, I wanted a type of paint that did not have art historical references. I didn't want it to be red. I didn't want it some dark and dramatic. So for me, I picked fluorescent orange because it's kind of a non-color, and it's hard to sort of situate it, especially when it's applied very thickly. It's sort of more like a cupcake than like the history of painting. And so it sits in this kind of in-betweenness. By the way, sidebar, no paint manufacturer makes fluorescent orange oil paint. So I have to have it specially made. I found a guy in Tampa, Florida, who will make it for me. So once again, as I said before, thank you, Florida. So that's why these are here. And the text you see peeking out under the paint are things Timon actually says in the play, especially Act 4, Scene 3 for the aficionados. I mean, nobody's read it, I'm just joking. But it's there if you want. So all the T's are for Timon, and they're more sort of a lumpy, abstract expressionist gestural technique. The circles are for the character of Merchant. And those, I was thinking, okay, Merchant. And for every character, I sort of come up with what I think are the perfect associations. And I tried to think Merchant means buying something or paying for something. And I tried to think of the first time I ever paid for something with my money that reflected my taste. And I grew up in Central West Virginia, and there's a laundromat there that my mom would take me to. I mean, she went too, which didn't drop me off there, but we would go to the laundromat together. And there was a jukebox there, and she would give me 4 quarters. I may be like 5, 6 years old. She'd give me 4 quarters and say, I'll just play whatever you want. And I remember that feeling of making the decision and taking my quarter, which was round, putting it in the jukebox, and the record would pop out back in those days. This is olden times, you young people. The record would pop out, and I would look at it, and then I'm in a laundromat where all of the circles, the front loads of the washers are spinning. And I thought, this is a perfect situation. All these circles activated in one place. So these records you see depicted, and they are depicted. Like sometimes people think they're collaged, but I don't do that. But the records depicted are ones I remember actually playing back when I was a kid on a jukebox in Central West Virginia. So that was Merchant because it was the first time I paid for something with my own money that got my taste. I'm going to limp over here. I broke my foot, by the way. Not anybody's fault. But again, sometimes people ask me, hey, Drennen, how come you go through all this effort? How come you hate collage? Why don't you just glue something down? And I'm not opposed to collage, but most adhesives might last 60 to 80 years, whereas a well-mixed paint can last 300 to 500 years. So I'm counting on the future generation. So I got to make sure it holds together. And, now that you know that these were inspired by a laundromat moment, you can see, I mean, there's like money that got loose. There's like things sloshing around, like you can see it now. But I started these during the pandemic as well. So that dot pattern that I use as my compositional technique was based on that early illustration of the COVID virus. Remember that? Seems like a blur, but that little cartoon COVID, and I used that as my starting point because I started making those during the pandemic. The most recent character and the one that I raced to finish in time, when Nandini said, hey, would you like to be in a show? And I said, for God's sakes, yes. And I said, okay, I need to finish this one up in time for the show. And these are guillotine shapes, in case you didn't recognize that. It's great if you didn't. Enjoy your innocent life. But for the others who did say, wait a minute, is that what killed Charles II and Oliver Cromwell? But I like this guillotine shape, and I have works on paper. I have these stretchers I have to get custom made. And then I'm putting, and this is inspired or prompted by the one nice character in the whole play, who's Flavius. And so I tried to think of something that I thought was nice. So these like images of the sky and so forth are here. But anyway, I think probably, you should never hand a microphone to an artist, but is that good, or should I ask, anybody have any questions? Okay. No, that's good, that's good. I'm pretending to think before I answer. What I'll say is, again, I grew up in Central West Virginia, in a working class Appalachian town, and there were no galleries, still no galleries around really in the whole state. And when I was a kid, there weren't even really museums. There was one in the state capital, Charleston, and then that might have been it at the time. So I didn't grow up seeing art in person. Like, I didn't go to a museum until I was 20 maybe, or 21. So, and there were no movie theaters around, so I didn't experience a lot of what other people would experience. And now you have cable television everywhere, great. But in Appalachia in the 70s, you depended on like antenna TV reception. I know I'm speaking a strange, mysterious language, but so there wasn't much. There might be like NBC and then CBS blurry. So I say all of that because the first time I experienced greatness of culture, like a great creative thing, was books. So for me, books were always first, and still I think that imprinted me, like with what my standard is for greatness. And there have been people that accused me. Was it accused, or maybe they just mentioned it nicely? No, I think they accused me. They said that I was a frustrated novelist because it seems like all I want is characters and time. And I was like, well, that's not wrong. I mean, I can have both. I can also be a painter. But for me, it starts with literature and drawing, like in terms of the art. So those were the first two things I experienced. I drew every day as a kid I don't know why, I just instinctively did. And then I read constantly, I still do. So I'm still a bibliophile. So those two things then spiderweb out into everything else in terms of teaching and academia and so forth. Oh, you're welcome. My God, Craig, you answered so well. Oh, thank you. I knew you were thinking it. Any other questions? There's one, either you're exactly behind the camera or the camera just raised its hand. I can answer both of those. 10:10 is the happiest time. If you look at any advertisement for watches, it's always set at 10:10 because a study, I guess, back in the Mad Men era in the 60s said people like it because it looks like a smile. 8:20, terrible. Looks very sad. And so it's as simple as that. It's like a little thing to get people on my side. So this is a happy, you instinctively felt happy. If the McGovern button didn't do it, then the 10:10 hopefully did. McGovern, by the way, was the first presidential election I voted for as a first grader. We had a mock election in my first grade class, and I voted for McGovern because I was a clever boy, and I thought, he's going to win because he has govern in his name. And I remember being so happy, I could barely walk to the front of the class because I was so excited, and I put my little slip of paper in the box. And then, as it turned out, in my class, he lost by a great margin, and also in the rest of the country. And in terms of the dollar coins, what I do when I'm assembling these, I get the records on eBay, and so I have to find all these records that I remember as a kid. And again, I was a strange boy because I like to memorize the whole jukebox listing, starting with ABBA, ending with Warren Zevon. And I did it so I could remember it for the next Saturday when I went so I could pick something else. And I didn't know anything about music. I just thought it was cool names. So when I'm looking for items and I can't find them yet, I'll put in a cardboard substitute just to get the composition sort of set. And I was looking for a Loretta Lynn, I wanted a 12-inch single of a Loretta Lynn song called The Pill, which she recorded in praise of birth control. Country music used to be cool. And the dollar, I have an actual dollar bill depicted in the other painting, but in this one, I wanted some Susan B. Anthony's in there to be sort of support Another Woman for McGovern moment and the pill, but I couldn't get them in time. So I just left my cardboard stand-ins and I just expanded them a little bit. And often when I'm sending images out to people, they assume that everything is collage. So to solve that, I put these drop shadows where it couldn't be collaged and be cast in a shadow. That'll straighten things out, but of course it didn't. But that's, yes, happy time clock, my cardboard substitute, and it happens throughout my work. Whenever there's something I can't get, I just make a cardboard like stunt double, and then sometimes that turns out to be even better.
Well, will you change those out if you can find what you want?
How dare you? Madam, it's perfect. No, I'll do another one. I'll do a new one. Yeah. Otherwise, I would constantly go back and fix my earlier work, and I would never be able to move forward. Anybody else? These are good questions. You guys are not only better looking than the Atlanta audience, but also smarter. Well, I was an artist in residence in a place in New York, the Triangle Arts Foundation, in summer 2003. And there was a critic in one of the newspapers, I don't know which one, and they were criticizing Summer Stock, which was Shakespeare in the Park. And they would give like a really rough review, like New York style. They're like, well, the scenery was terrible, the actors weren't delivering their lines with any gusto. And it just went down, everything was bad. And the last line was, but it could be worse. It could have been Timon of Athens. And I thought, well, what is that? Because I hadn't heard of it. So that's how I heard of it. And then I looked into it. I went to a used bookstore. I got a copy. There were many copies because nobody wants it. That one gets returned a lot. And then it started from there. And I became fascinated by it. So the more I looked into it, the more sort of obscure and impenetrable it became, and the more I liked it. Anyway, I'm going to count on whenever we need to move on, just let me know. Oh, yeah. Is it good? Okay. Good?
Hi, everyone. I want to take an opportunity right off the bat to thank the Hunter Museum, and in particularly Nandini McGrandy, for this opportunity to show here with these incredible artists. Really enabled me to expand my art practice. So thank you for that, this opportunity. As Nandini stated, I started out as a graphic designer and illustrator and thought that discipline was going to be my life career. But as the changes in the industry with digital, and this was back in the dark ages when we built everything by hand to show clients, and I loved the tactile feel of the industry at that time. And when it changed to digital, that was it. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep in touch with it through Photoshop, which I love, but I'm not going to continue to make this my life discipline. So I started painting as a hobby, met Rita Canaday in Atlanta back in 1992, and she taught me to push paint around. And then from that point forward, I was hooked. Because a lot of artists will tell you that it is a compulsion and an obsession. So it's very difficult to put down an art practice once you start it. You just have this need to get into the studio every day. So, but what I also found is that by working in Photoshop initially, I create most of my work through Photoshop sketches. So there's this marriage between the layering in Photoshop and the layering of collage in mixed media. So I find it to be a perfect marriage of how to work. And usually what I'll do is I will print out a digital sketch, I'll do a traditional grid like the old masters, and then grid off my substrate and begin. So to blow it up. One of the other things that my design background did for me was it made me appreciate the way of thinking called formalization. And formalization is where the aesthetics of the piece takes precedent over the concept. So the composition, the colors, the palette, the movement in the piece is very important to me. The concept is there, but it's hidden beneath a veneer of beauty. So, which is pretty much how society operates, is the veneer of beauty is there, but what's underneath? So for me, one of the things that I employ is what I call the architecture of space, which is 5 principles I came up with in order to also teach my practice locally through Townsend Atelier, but also how I could describe my work, to the layman who doesn't really know, people who come into the classes, a lot of them are hobbyists and they don't have an extensive background in art. So this gives them something to grab a hold of. And what's involved in that, the architecture of space, is what I call the heroic area, which is what you would call the focal point. And the reason I call it a heroic area is because my focal points are very active and have a lot of movement and spill out into the rest of the composition. So it's not a traditional focal point. It's embedded into the overall composition. And I also work with geometry and what I call a shape vocabulary. So if you see my work in different venues, you'll know it's an Anna Carll just by the look of the shapes and the way that I put pieces together. Most people really recognize the work. The other thing I employ is what I call foundation shapes. And these are large areas of color, like the yellows that you see, that anchor the linear work and the smaller shapes to what I call the spatial plane, which is whatever your substrate is. So it gives a kind of formal architecture to hold the piece and kind of contain it a little bit within the space, but also works with everything else. I also employ what I call cross connections, and that's going to be your linear elements that go across the surface, which are present in all the work, including the grid pieces as well. So cross connections are important. A lot of these types of pieces that come down and move around and take you around and keeps the eye moving in around the composition. The other thing I employ is sight lines. So this is where, for instance, this diagonal of the top of this shape kind of flows down and picks up with some of the work and picks up over here with this shape. And then also linear elements that line up across the surface, as well as horizontal sight lines that come across. So I'm employing all of these within the same piece and making it all work together as much as possible. The final thing that is one of the most difficult things for a lot of artists to accomplish is what we call white space, but it could be black space, purple space, yellow space. But this is areas of a piece that allow the eye to rest. And if there's total confusion across the surface, it's really more about pattern. So all of these things I work together to create this work from a formalization point of view. As to the concept, the urban series is based about me going around in the community and photographing utility wires and bridge canopies and street grids and all of the things that connect civilization together. And I take those images into Photoshop and I print them out on archival watercolor paper and collage them into the work. So from a distance, you'll see just a relative kind of line with some pattern, but when you get up close to it, you see this upside down stairwell. And for instance, all of the taupe color in the background, that is a dilapidated stairwell that I actually downloaded from the New York Public Library's open source archive, which you can download and use any way you want. They're free and open to the public. So it's another great resource if you're not great at photography and you just want to download photography. So I get my imagery both from my own photographs and then also from open source places. Flickr Commons and Wikipedia Commons are another source. So as you can see from structure, the whole idea behind the urban series is how we create civilizations and Mother Nature comes in with big weather events and destroys what we build. So we're constantly in this state of reconstruction. And that's why I like to use the images of infrastructure to create that. I also like to fragment them, cut them up, turn them upside down, take them out of their normal view, and see them as color and pattern. Because I like taking a lot of different patterns and putting them together into one piece. That's important to me. And then I would say, like, the final thing is when I first moved to Chattanooga, I took a workshop in book arts through Book Arts at the Open Press. And I got into bookmaking and making original books. And that's this piece here in the display case is a book I've crafted using the mini maquettes that I worked with as shape and proportion exercises, preparing for these pieces. Because I knew I was going to be making the biggest studio pieces of my career, and I needed to get my mindset in the right way. With the big grid piece over here, that is a map of Chattanooga from 1871. And buried underneath that grid is vintage maps, topographic maps of Hamilton County. So in a way, I think of myself as a construction worker where I build this work from the foundation up, layering parts of civilization on top of each other. And a lot of times I sand back down into the work and destroy it and then rebuild it yet again to create more history on the panel, as well as grunge textures, which I like to have throughout, because that's what happens to our cities and villages and towns across the globe. So it's about a process of accumulation, using both improvisation and organization to get the work started off with digital sketches and then let serendipity happen in how the piece changes over time. Eventually, I toss the sketch aside and, just let the piece develop on its own. But at least it gives me a starting point. So, and I love having what happens in book arts with stitching, cross-pollinating into the wall hangings, as well as the graphic design that cross-pollinates into everything, because most of my work has a very graphic feel to it. So that's about it. Is there any questions? Yeah, so palette, I actually did a series of maquettes which are in the display case over here using paper samples from my graphic design days, and I actually printed out images of 2 pieces that I built for my gallery in Dallas, Texas, and they got destroyed. So they ended up in a landfill in Dallas somewhere, these 2 pieces, through a series of events. So rather than try to recreate the work, I wanted to honor it by printing out sections of those 2 pieces and using those sections in the maquettes. So that part of the palette was determined from those. And then finding actual paper, or in a lot of cases I use house paint, acrylic house paint. So I'll go to Ace Hardware, I'll match my Sherwin-Williams chip fan closest to the color in the maquette, then I go to Ace Hardware and I get a quart of that paint. So this yellow ochre and the green came from Ace Hardware. So I use a lot of different media together to produce this work, but I try to make every piece as archival as possible. And I use acrylic house paint versus latex house paint. And yes, there is a difference between the 2. So that was how the palette was determined, was through the maquette. Any other questions? Yes.
So the center, as I'm looking at it, is the weaving in the middle, right? With the yes, that is, what is that?
That is a fine art paper. I think it's an Amati bark paper, and it's called the circle pattern. So it's, you can get it in black as well, which I think the black is in this piece over here. So, yeah, and that up here, yeah. So it's a combination of fine art papers. If you look at the patterning in the brown here, it's an infinity tiger pattern from Japan. So, you know, I'd like to bring world culture together through this work. This pattern right here was from a lino cut of African masks that I did probably decades ago after I saw Les Demoiselles d'Avignon by Picasso at, that's at MoMA, I think, in New York. And I got fascinated by African masks, so I did a lino cut. So a lot of these files come from either work I've created in the past with workshops, or fine art papers, or Ace Hardware colors, you know, Sherwin-Williams or whatever. Any other questions? It is heavyweight cotton canvas. And the reason I use heavyweight is because it'll take a lot of abuse, and I build a lot of layers on this material. So linen doesn't work because it sags and does all kinds of weird things. But it's called the Blick Premier Cotton Canvas Heavyweight. So these panels are pretty heavy once you get all this material on here. Substrate is whatever you build a piece on. So it could be panel, it could be paper, it could be canvas, it could be aluminum. Substrate, yeah, so a substrate. And I consider the substrate to be the spatial plane, as I alerted to before. So the spatial plane is like a geometry definition of objects that move in space. So, but it's within a defined space. And so I consider the substrate to be the spatial plane. So creating composition within that, as well as depth of field, and using my background in photography for depth of field and so forth. So all of it came together from, you know, my design degree from the University of Florida, and incredible program I went through there. And the study with Jerry Uelsman, the photographer, he was a research professor when I was there. And I got interested in Photoshop because of him and his work. So it's all of a piece, it all comes together, yeah.
So first, let me just say thank you to Nandini for the opportunity to show the work and be included in this exhibition. The works that you see on the wall are all hand cut paper. I use an X-Acto blade, and that's about it. X-Acto blade and then mount them. Um, but I should mention, someone asked, how did you start cutting paper downstairs? We were having that conversation when we got called up. Um, the, my background is in printmaking and fabric design. And I really was drawn to the graphics in old books, the woodblock carvings. They're just powerful mark making. It's either there or it's not. There's no kind of in between, there's no gradation. It's very bold and graphic. And so it called to me. I really love carving. Um, and it requires you to think reductively, taking away portions of the surface to have the image emerge. I also, at the same time, was studying fabric design. I love pattern. You know, it just makes me smile to see. It could be pattern of color or design, like lines or squiggles, wiggles. It just brings me joy. And so that's kind of my foundation. I got residency kind of through a fluke. I had missed the bus and it was kind of sad standing on the street. And a professor was driving by that lived in my neighborhood and gave me a ride to the train station. He said, there's an artist residency. It's only by invitation. Would you be interested in applying? And I got this residency. I had no idea what I was going to do for the residency. And so I spent many days in the studio just moving materials around, going to the bookstore, just looking for inspiration. And I love children's books, so I went to the bookstore and I saw a copy of Snowy Day. And that's illustrated with collage. And so I went to the studio and I made collage inspired by Snowy Day. Just little simple cutouts of kids in snowsuits. And it's like, oh, that's so satisfying, just with scissors and paper. That residency, though, I didn't end up leaving it with any kind of finished piece. I had some like rough sketches, but I remembered the experience of cutting that paper. And that residency was in Philly, and I moved back to Georgia, had an opportunity to put works together for a show. And I thought, well, maybe I'll take those sketches from the residency and translate them into paper cuts. And those were my first paper cuts. That was probably 2006 or 7. And I've been cutting paper ever since. It's just it's meditative. That process of just kind of sitting there. You can't rush it. You have to kind of slow your thoughts down. Make your movements very intentionally. And because, again, it's very graphic, like the wood block, I have to whittle it down to the essence of the concept, the image. Because if you give too much information, it gets muddled and you can't actually read the image very clearly. And I liked that it required me to focus, to hone in. The pieces in the show are, there's actually 2 series represented here. The ones that you see in this space and on the far wall were cut specifically for this exhibition. It's called Seeds. And then there's two on the back side of these walls called Speak to My Heart. And they're an earlier series of cuts. Um, all of my work, for as long as I can remember, and it's not something I did consciously at first, but kind of getting an opportunity to look back at the work, really has been about um, trying to identify gestures or moments that we can all empathize with or connect with. Um, I really want people to feel connected to a larger community, to feel loved on, cared on, nurtured. For the Seed series, with all of the just political unrest, and it feels very much like a small group of people are making detrimental decisions that affect all of us, and it feels overwhelming. So, sitting in the studio, I was thinking, I know that the thing that I do won't necessarily, just from a single action, impact that larger governmental or political decision making, but I can take comfort in connecting with people in my community and kind of, instead of top down, leading from the bottom up, doing, uh, um, being involved with, maybe it's just the cleanup an area of the neighborhood that's kind of gotten trashed or whatever. It makes a big difference to come down the street and see that lot cleaned out, or plant a garden that people can enjoy, whether you know them personally or not. You're kind of touching them. If you are involved in like a community garden, then there's that opportunity for intergenerational knowledge being passed. And you're not only planting the seeds for the plants that will grow, but you're also planting that seed of knowledge and care and community and understanding of the natural flow of time in the younger generation. So with the Seed series, I wanted to focus mostly on younger people as our seeds, and interaction. I like to have a couple of people in my images, because we don't exist in a vacuum. There's only one image out of the ones that are featured here that doesn't have a secondary person, and it's the piece on the back wall there. And that would have had a second person, but there's also time. It's got to get to the museum. So, that's these works here. Um, as you look at the work, you still see my interest in textiles and the way things are draped in pattern, and the way that the hair and the fabrics are done. And my interest in story. Remember, I told you I was interested in children's books. I always thought I was going to be a children's book illustrator. And then when I learned a little bit more about that career, I realized maybe it's not for me. I work very slowly. But I do like creating an image that inspires the viewer to fill in the blanks, to create the space around the figures, to think about what may have happened before or after the moment that you're seeing here. My images are often composites, so I like to work in series, and I also usually have a concept or maybe a single image that then inspires me to work out other pieces to make it into a series. And so, like with this one, I knew that I wanted it to be focused on the kind of thinking about community garden. And so I sought stock images of people planting community garden. You know, you do the searches. And then, so those are my building blocks. And then I figure out what images, what gestures best express the moment and would work well together. So the piece over here, the two little girls, I knew I wanted to do at least one girl that had beads, because that used to be my favorite thing when I was little. My mom would braid our hair, put beads on it, and I'd spend all day just shaking my head so I could hear the beads. So I wanted a little girl with beads. And I found two separate images. The girl on the left, I think she was standing there picking berries off of a bush in the image, in the stock image. And the other girl was digging, so I thought they might work nicely together. So I did a sketch and had to kind of fill in the blank in terms of the girl on the left, to give her, you know, legs that would be kneeling so that she'd be on the same level as the other. And I like to sketch on tracing paper, so I can kind of move sketches around and see how they work with one another. And then once I get my composition, I transfer that on the back side of my paper. And there are single sheets of black Reese BFK or Arches, which is like a 100% cotton papers that are often used for like printmaking, those kinds of things. And I transfer my image on the back side using white carding. So it's like kind of, you know, the carding paper clip, white instead of the traditional gray. And I cut from the back side. I will usually take two sheets together, facing one another. So when I finish cutting, I have an addition of two, but they're mirrored images. So if you see the signature, say one of two, because I will often cut two at a time. I can't remember, I have to look at my own signature. I can't remember if these are additions or just a single one. Because it also takes me longer to cut when I have two sheets taped together. And when I finish cutting, there's still a single sheet. They're all one unit. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah. It depends on what was cut. Sometimes the shape of something changes because it's gone, you know. So if I'm not too far along and I really don't like, I'll start over again because I have the original sketch I can transfer on another sheet. I rarely do that though. I usually try and find a solution. So if I really don't like it, maybe that section gets completely cut away. If it's just like a little slip, and so it's not connected when I wanted it to be connected, I know I'm gonna mount it. So I just keep going. Yeah. Because I'm not a machine, you know, so I have to give myself some grace too. Otherwise, I'd never get anything done.
So do you use an X-Acto knife or scissors or both?
I use an X-Acto. There are different paper cutting traditions. So, like in Poland, they use giant shears, like sheep cutting shears. In Germany, it's smaller scissors. Um, in Mexico, it's chisels. Um, it's just an X-Acto, a number 11 X-Acto. I don't do any fancy blades. It's just that one blade, and I've tried, there's swivel heads or things that slide on your finger. I just like the straight handle with the number 11. It, yeah, yeah. I have a number of friends who are in the book arts community, and they're like, oh, you need to get a scalpel. It's so good, the scalpel, the scalpel. So I got a scalpel, but the angle is different. It's the number 11 is, I think, a 45 degree angle, and the scalpel is like a 30. And yeah. I was like, man, this looks like I'm just starting to learn how to cut. So I went back to my X-Acto. Yeah. But I mean, it's good to try, different tools. But I just use the X-Acto, and you'll see on the little girl's puffs back there, the circles, I use a Japanese screw punch. So it allows me to punch holes without being tied to it's like the edge of the paper, The standard hole punch, it only has a certain distance you can come in. But the screw punch, you can punch anywhere. It's got different size heads. It takes me about a month to cut. I mean, I've got a 9 to 5, so I'm cutting in the evenings or on the weekends. And actually, the longest part is the composition. Sketching and figuring out what those compositions are going to be. Nandini can tell you what I showed her that I was going to do for this show is the concept is the same, but it's very different than what I actually ended up cutting.